Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the Todd Talk Leadership Podcast. I'm happy to introduce here in a moment Robyn Torgrimson, which I'll formally introduce you here in a second. But I guess I want to open this up with a question for those of you who are watching. And the question is have you ever worked for a narcissist leader or a bully leader or any type of dysfunctional or toxic leader of any kind? And so if you have, then this podcast is for you. And so I'm happy to have Robyn Torgrimson on with me. She is the founder of the podcast called Maniacs, which we're going to talk about here momentarily. And we have some past experience as far as indirectly with each other and the fact that we worked for the same organization at two different times. And unfortunately, that organization was very toxic, had very toxic leadership. And I want us to kind of talk about our experiences with toxic and dysfunctional leadership. And the purpose of this podcast is simply to talk about all things leadership, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so my expertise, my experience is dealing with in dealing with the subject of toxic and dysfunctional, unhealthy leadership. And I want to bring light to all of this. And so the reason I started these podcasts is so that we can really get into the nitty-gritty of the dark side of leadership and how we can identify those dark sides, and also to find solutions on how to solve those problems. And so with Robyn, you are the podcast founder of Maniacs. And so for those of you who are wanting to know more information about that, I will be listing all of that description below, but kind of give everybody what is Maniacs? What's the purpose? What was the intent? Let's start there, and then we'll kind of go into our personal experiences.
Sure. So thank you for inviting me on, first of all. Excited to talk about our experiences, not only there, but just with toxic leadership overall. But I started Maniacs for several different reasons, but the main reason was I've worked in corporate America most of my adult life, and a few years ago was hired at a church to be the HR director. And it's a church, a school, and a college. And I was the HR director for about 300 people, and very quickly realized how toxic and abusive the environment was. But I also felt an obligation to stay there and be there and kind of protect other people and give them some hope that, things could get better. And so I was there for almost 4 years, and unfortunately nothing ever got better. And in fact, it got worse. And I started Maniacs to not only expose this organization specifically, but also let people know that these abuses and these behaviors can happen a lot of places, and people can get desensitized to it or feel like they have to put up with certain things because they do need a paycheck. They are the providers for their family and have a very hard time speaking up. And the podcast was created to shed light on all of those things.
Yeah, and our history together, we've never worked together personally, but we worked for the same organization. And the extreme dysfunction and toxic leadership of this church, which is still in operation today, it was devastating. And for those of you who may not know who I am, because this podcast is fairly new at this time that we're recording this, I worked on staff at this on the pastoral team back in the mid-90s, which I know that's aging me a little bit here. But Stephanie and I, my wife, we were there, and we felt like we hit a gold mine when we went to go to Bible college there. And About a year into my Bible college years there, they asked me to come on staff, and then I started my journey there. So I didn't really see the dark side of all of this ministry dysfunction until I got onto the staff side. Matter of fact, my direct boss, not the senior pastor, but my direct boss over the ministry that I worked under was a mini me of the senior pastor who was very narcissistic and had bully tendencies. And so I had to deal with not only the senior pastor, but also my direct oversight. And that was difficult. And so knowing all of this, kind of tell us some of your experiences there at this church. Kind of give me your definition of what a narcissistic leader is or a bully leader, because in my book, The Dysfunctional Leader that I wrote, it actually lists the descriptions of what a narcissist leader is and a bully leader is. And that's what this senior pastor was to us. What is your thoughts and definitions on what a narcissist and a bully leader is?
Well, I will say when I first started reading your book, I'm like, is he in my head? Is he writing exactly what I'm thinking or what exactly happened to me while I was there? And for me, I dealt with several narcissistic leaders, but at this ministry, it was the most severe that I had ever seen. And I think a lot of times when we think of narcissists, we think of terms like gaslighting and extreme mood swings and uh, you know creating these environments and creating these situations because of their abusive behavior. But then when someone actually calls them out or has an issue with it, then all of a sudden they're the victim, you're the issue, and everyone just needs to fall in line. And if you would fall in line, then you're not going to have to deal with these behaviors that you think are so toxic and abusive. And the things, that I witnessed directly is they surround themselves with people that are yes men and yes people and continue to perpetuate the behavior that they have and also, you know, almost require, even if they don't say it out loud, conformity to these issues and these behaviors that you're going to experience. But public shaming, if you've upset them, then they will cut off communication and relationship with you, or even speak about you publicly, even if they don't say your name and everybody else knows about it. So public humiliation and creating environments where you can't speak up. If someone speaks up, then they are disciplined for it, possibly terminated for it. And so it's just this fear culture, which they want to, at least in this ministry situation, they want to call it an honor culture, but it's really a fear culture. And so if you want to keep your job and you want to work there, you have to fall in line with all of these tactics that they put into place to preserve themselves, preserve their reputation, all the while treating people very terribly and creating an environment where no one can speak up.
Yeah, I have found in my studies on this subject matter that there are different extremes of dysfunction and toxic leadership. I always use the spectrum. Of one side, there's the healthy leadership, and then the opposite extreme side is the extreme, very unhealthy leadership. And this leader that we worked for was definitely on the extreme level to where, in my opinion, they should not be in leadership at all. I have a tendency to really have a strong defense for Christian leaders in the fact that we as Christians should be one setting the example of what a healthy leader is. And whenever I see unhealthy, I'm talking about extreme unhealthy Christian leaders, whether they're pastors, business leaders, it doesn't matter the capacity, but if they put the title Christian on their lifestyle and they are so dysfunctional and so toxic, to me, they need to be out of leadership. That's kind of what Mega Maniacs, your podcast, is kind of doing, is exposing the extreme side of bad, toxic leadership. So, what are some of your personal experiences there that you dealt with? What were some of the telltale signs of that started to get you to think, something's not right here?
Well, when I started there in 2019, the previous HR director, she was actually a contractor, and she had been there for about 2 years. But she left in December of 2018, and then I started in February of 2019. So there was a little bit of a period that there was nothing going on there. But the person that was there before me was very much of the mentality that you protect the business, you protect the leadership. And so even though I don't believe she agreed with everything that they were doing, I believe that she, in her head, that she was going to protect the business and the leadership at all costs. And I'm just not that kind of HR director. I do believe that there's policies and procedures that we need to uphold, but I'm also going to ask a lot of questions, and I'm the resource for the humans that are working there, and that's how I've always seen that job title for myself. And so within a couple weeks of being there, I knew something was off because I received a resignation letter from a staff pastor that, due to several reasons, but the main reason being that him and probably 12 to 15 other people were in a staff meeting with the executive pastor, and after being in there for 8, 9, 10 hours of just getting completely ripped to shreds of how no one's doing their job and no one is, buying into the vision, the executive pastor shot a gun off. And
a physical gun. Like with a bullet, a physical gun.
Shot a gun. And I've talked to several people that were in that meeting, and 2 of the 3 that would talk to me believed that that was an intimidation tactic. The other person thought that he just kind of got bored and was fiddling around with his gun, and it went off. And to me, regardless of the reason, why do we need a gun in a staff meeting?
Absolutely.
Anyways? And we're in a church, by the way. Like, why do we need that? But again, it was creating this culture and this environment. This executive pastor also has, lethally trained guard dogs that he brings with him everywhere, and he's now carrying a gun, and he doesn't care to shoot it off. And so that was one of the first signs. And then, I mentioned the previous HR director because when I first started there, I really had to establish the kind of HR director that I was, and that the staff could trust me, and that if they came to me in confidence, that I wasn't running to the executive offices and saying, so-and-so said this and so-and-so said that, because they, that's what they were used to. And so seeing how fearful people were just to see me walking around the building and trying to build rapport with people and establish relationships with people, they all treated me like she's trying to, con us and get information out of us so she can run and tell, the executive leadership. And so that was another, telltale sign for me that there were more issues. And then as time went on, the amount of people that were coming into my office and, had been working 45 days straight with no days off and felt guilty for asking for one day off so that they could rest because their bodies and their minds, they were worn down, and asking me how, I would handle it or how I would approach it. And, being in the staff meetings and hearing people just being belittled and berated in front of their peers, that was, and that's not, even the worst of it, but those were a few of the situations that happened. And I knew that there was a lot more going on behind the scenes than what anybody knew about.
Yeah, I didn't see all the dysfunction until I got on staff, and I noticed that the normal tendency for this pastor was when he was on the platform with a microphone in his hand, he could turn a switch on in a heartbeat to this positive, great, charismatic leader, which he really had a charismatic personality. He could preach the phone book, if those of you who are familiar with what phone books are and what they used to be. But you can give him a magazine of any kind and he would preach a message on it, a masterpiece message, but he knew how to turn it on. And I have also found that with narcissists, they have a tendency to always play the victims, like you said earlier, when they are the perpetrator. They always are the ones that act like, well, I'm the one that's getting the bad end of the deal here, when they're the ones that are actually the one causing the main problems. And they don't really want to fess up or admit to them being the issue. And that's what you and I experienced with this pastor there. And I would even say, even if someone did try to go up to him, even today, and tell him, hey, here's what you're doing wrong as a leader, he would sit there and deny you and deny what you're saying and be adamant, vehemently adamant about he's not in the wrong. Do you feel like that's a normal tendency for these types of personality traits?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And the turning on and turning off of the personality is also another, they can be screaming and hollering and yelling. And if a video, a camera turns on, or somebody that they don't want to see them behaving that way, is nearby or walks into the room, it's like a switch flips and they're a completely different person.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I remember one time Stephanie and I, of course, Stephanie was on the platform. She was one of the main soloists that he would have sing all the time. And I was on the pastoral team. And so we had some visibility there. And one time we hadn't been there for years. I'm talking about maybe 20 years we hadn't been there. And we went there for some special service. I don't know. We didn't really want to go, but it was a special event. We went because they were honoring somebody and we wanted to be a part of that and be there in person. Well, somehow during the worship set at the beginning of the service, he found out that we were there, and he found out where we were, and in the middle of worship he walks to us, and we're about 4 rows back from the front in this massive sanctuary, and he crawls over the pews to get to Stephen and I and give us this big hug and just greets us for a few seconds and then turns around and walks off. And then we got thinking, man, that was really weird, because in private he would have never done that. And I saw after that they must have somebody who goes around taking pictures of the whole service all the time for social media. And they showed a picture of him hugging us in this pew. And I'm thinking, that was a social media ploy. That was a marketing tactic. And I noticed how horrible I felt after it was done that he had did that, because of that. It just wasn't him naturally. And so, how has these types of moments of dealing with dysfunctional leaders, how have they shaped your leadership philosophy going forward?
Well, I don't know that in that environment that it necessarily shaped how I view things, except for I think, well, and I don't even know if I'm going to say this right. I feel like I was there for a reason and I was there for a purpose. And what I was going to say is that if I would have just paid attention to the red flags in the very beginning, I probably would have left right away. And, but I also saw some blessings in being there, to be quite honest, not directly related to them, but the fact that, about 6 months after I started working there, my husband, who's now my ex-husband at the time, lost his job. And so had I not been working, we wouldn't have been able to afford, our mortgage or anything. And so, and I met a ton of great people there as well. But you want to make a difference when you care about people and you've spent a lot of time on your career and your education, and making sure that you're up on standards and how businesses should operate and how they could operate at a very high level if they employed certain things. And so you want to be helpful in those ways, but when they won't hear you, they won't meet with you, they don't care how much experience or education that you have, they just want you to do what they want you to do, and that's it. And so I think that I would say the only way that specific situation kind of shaped me was that to pay more attention to, the red flags and making a real conscious decision. Am I here for a real purpose, or am I subjecting myself to this environment because I think that I have to be here and not because I really have to?
Yeah. Yeah. I know for Stephanie and I, we're there because God called us there. And of course, God knew about all the dysfunction before we got there. We didn't have it in our head knowledge about what we were going to be experiencing. But I will tell you, as much as the great positive things we've learned there to be as in a leadership role, we've learned about what not to do in leadership just as much. And to me, that is just as valuable, because all the things that I saw going on there in the leadership roles that I absolutely abhorred, I took those with me in my leadership and says, I will never be like that. I will never act like that. I won't do those things because of how it affected me. So for me, my leadership philosophy has been impacted for the good, because I experienced all those bad things there and many good things. I want to make sure I say that there was a lot of great things that I experienced there. Fabulous people, fabulous congregation, fabulous staff people that we worked with. But I've learned about what not to do in ministry as much as I did what to do in ministry there. So it was training ground on both ends. Stephanie, my wife's dad, he pastored there in the city and was pastor for 20 plus years at that time. And when she told him that she was going to go to Bible college there, he had some insight already into the church just because of being a pastor in the city and people he had connections that knew information. He told my wife, he said, I bless you to go, but he said, you're going to learn a lot of what not to do in ministry, and you need to learn those. And so those were great learning points for us. And like you said earlier, when God calls us there, we are called there. There's a purpose, there's a cause there. And you and I are better people today because of our experiences that we've had there. So, what would you tell others who are going through the same situation of working for a dysfunctional or toxic boss? What would you say to them? You've kind of alluded to that some, of maybe watching for telltale signs, but is there anything else that you would tell somebody who's sitting right now in this situation, or possibly going into a situation working for a boss like this?
Well, I think, first and foremost is, if if God has called you to something or you feel called to something, that there is a purpose behind that. And I think if you can keep the right perspective about things, like you said, I'm learning more not what to do than, what to do, even though there's some good things, but it still helps as you move forward of what not to do. But I would also say that there are people that were in even worse situations than you and I were in when we worked there, and that they couldn't keep that perspective. It was literally eating them alive in almost every area of their life. They're sacrificing their marriages, they're sacrificing their families, they're sacrificing their health, their mental health. And to me, that's a high price to pay for a paycheck. And so I think that you have to weigh the pros and cons, and you have to really decide, am I still called to be here? Am I called to be in this place? Or am I using God as an excuse to be complacent? Because I also think that he does not want us to continue to be abused and manipulated under the guise of it being God, but because we are so beat down that we don't think that we can do anything else, or that we can make it anywhere else. And every work, I think we start telling ourselves like every workplace is toxic or can be toxic. At least I know how it is here, so I'm just going to stay. And so I think that it's wise to hear all of the sides. If you're hearing about taking a job or a position somewhere, I always go and read reviews. I try to read Glassdoor and Google and a lot of different reviews, not to just get one aspect of it, but what do people that do business with this place say? What do people that work there say? And, you're not going to make everyone happy, but there shouldn't be, an overwhelming side of it being, really, really bad. And asking questions about why are these, positions available? Is there a revolving door? If there is, there's usually a reason for that as well. And not making rash decisions. I think also a lot of times when we are in positions where we may need a job right now, and okay, it's, this company, it's paying this amount of money and this is a dream come true, and we don't do our due diligence, you should be also interviewing the place that's interviewing you. Absolutely. And finding out, is that really something that I want to be a part of? Because even in my situation, the people that knew me there knew I was not like them, but the people that just were on the outskirts, or maybe didn't actually work there or didn't know me very well, there's a big chance that because I was the face of their HR department, that they believed that I was just like the people that were creating this toxic, abusive environment. And I just wasn't willing to, put my professional career and my professional reputation on the line once it got so bad. I just didn't want to be affiliated with that anymore.
Yeah, I have found out that when God gives you grace to be somewhere, he allows you the ability to deal with all those bad things that are happening. Grace is allowing you to say, okay, I recognize it, but I'm going to fight through this. But there comes a point in time when the grace is lifted off of a season of your life, and you have to say that season, the little things that used to never bother you, it bothers you now. That's kind of a sign that Stephanie and I have always lived by, that we kind of realize that when the things that used to never bother us now bother us, it could be a sign that God is lifting the grace off of that season, and it may be our time to move on. And that's what happened at this church. Is we were there for quite a few years, and we just come to a point where we were done, and we says we have to start figuring out what our next is. And so we talked with a pastor there. He was also one of our Bible college instructors who we had great love and respect for. And we went to him and said, hey, look, here's how we're feeling. We feel like our season's coming up. Here's the things that are frustrating us. Please help us. As a pastor here, please help us navigate how we're feeling. And we will never forget his words. His words to us were, it's time to start charting your course. And when he said that, that was kind of like, okay, we don't have to quit tomorrow, but now we have an exit strategy. And we started strategizing and talking with each other of how we were going to leave the right way. And with this pastor's help on staff there, he helped us navigate our exit well with that. Now, it was not a great exit from the senior pastor's perspective, because we left a huge hole there, and he did not like that, but we had to go take care of ourselves. And so I remember that vividly. So with that, kind of tell us how people can get in connection with you, and how to find Mega Maniacs and those types of details.
Well, I actually finally just created a Mega Maniacs email account. So I was using a personal account, and as you can see, my last name is very long and can be hard to spell, well, kind of like yours. So
yes, very much
the email address is megamaniacs777@gmail.com for emailing me. And you can probably just go on YouTube and type in Mega Maniacs. It's, in the beginning, it wasn't established enough, so it really wasn't popping up. But now that it's been up for about 8 months or so, you should be able to type that in the search bar. And I think you can even just Google my name, and it will pop up from the Google, and then you can select that and go to the YouTube page for the podcast.
Yeah, so your podcast, it basically highlights all the dysfunction that's happened in the church and with this leadership. You interview a lot of people. As a matter of fact, Stephanie and I were on your podcast. You interviewed us because of our experiences there. My book, The Dysfunctional Leader, was created mainly because of that situation there. In working with this pastor as a dysfunctional leader. And as I have worked with other dysfunctional leaders, not as extreme as this one that we have been referencing in this podcast. But I wrote this book intentionally with that being the foundation of why I wrote it, is because I wanted to bring light and exposure to this. And that's exactly what you're doing. You've only had this podcast, you said, it for about 8 months, right?
Yeah, about 8 months. Yeah.
And I saw this morning, I kind of went on there to see what your subscription rate is, and it's 3,300 people, 3,300 plus, which is really impressive. You have gained a lot of followers. You have also been on many podcasts of others as well since starting this podcast to bring light. It seems like there's an effort by many people like us who are wanting to bring exposure and light to this kind of information of toxic leadership. And I appreciate all that you've done. And you've taken many bullets for starting this podcast. I'm sure I will take some bullets for starting this podcast. I'm anticipating those. Have you had any major bullets that you've had to dodge in starting this podcast?
I wouldn't really consider them. I mean, I received a cease and desist letter after the first episode from the church's attorneys, and I told them that I wasn't, doing either. And I've never heard from them again. And in the process, another another ministry that is sort of under this alliance of churches under this main mega ministry. Their names came up, and abusive, toxic environment. They, also sent me an email, telling me to take things down, the bullying tactics. And, that was probably it. I get some messages, I get, some rude things, but otherwise that's been about it. And I'm just not deterred by those things. I feel like this, God put me in this situation for a purpose, and that I am supposed to be doing this. And why should I then be in fear? And I just refuse to do that. And I hope that, the guests that are coming on and being very courageous to do so, despite, some of them have been harassed, they've been stalked. And if I lived closer to that ministry, I might, receive some of those same things. But I just refuse to be silent about this, especially now, because when I started the podcast, I thought that it was just, and not that it's just anything, but I thought that it was abusive, toxic behavior, and that people were being treated badly and it was wrong. But since the podcast coming out, and we've, uncovered a lot more atrocities, I especially won't be quiet now. And so that's probably the extent of it. So nothing too major as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, well, that's good, because you are a hero in doing this, and heroes always take a lot of punches. So I appreciate all that you're doing to help bring light to this kind of a subject matter. And for those of you who want to know more information about me, again, you see my name, Todd Marshall HEARNSBERGER. If you're interested in knowing more about me and my book and in the organization that I lead called Lead Well Solutions, which is a coaching and consulting organization to help Christian leaders with their leadership development, you can reach me at ToddMarshallHearnsberger.com. I know that's a mouthful, but you see the spelling there underneath my name, ToddMarshallHearnsberger.com. You can also reach me through that website as well. So again, Robyn, thank you for your time. Certainly appreciate all that you've been doing and all that you're going to continue to do to help make people better leaders and to bring light to this subject matter. And I want to have you back and to expand on this some more in the future. So again, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a great day.
All right. Thank you, everyone. You can follow me here on this Todd Talk podcast, and we'll see you on the next episode. God bless everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.